I paid for my brothers, their wives, and all five of their children to spend 5 days in Hawaii. Flights, an oceanfront hotel, meals, activities. Every dollar came from money my husband and I had earned, saved, and invested over more than a decade. I thought I was giving my family a memory none of us would ever forget. I was right, because less than 2 weeks after we returned home, one of my brothers accused my accounting firm of stealing from its biggest client. The other told me that since I clearly had money to spare, I should pay his daughter's private university tuition. That trip didn't destroy my family. It revealed what my family had started believing about me. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old and I live in Miami with my husband, James. I grew up with two brothers. Mark was the oldest, David was the youngest, and I was the one in the middle. Our parents were not wealthy, but they believed strongly in fairness. When each of us turned 18, they gave us the same amount of money, $25,000. It was money they had built slowly through savings accounts, overtime shifts, and years of living below their means. They never told us what to do with it. They only said, "This is your start. What happens next is your responsibility." I used most of my share to pay for part of an accounting degree. I worked evenings at a grocery store and weekends preparing basic tax returns for a small bookkeeping office. I lived with three roommates. I drove a car that made a different noise every month. It wasn't glamorous, but I graduated with less debt than I would have had otherwise. Mark invested his share in a mobile car detailing business with a friend. For a while, it looked promising. Then the friend disappeared with part of the equipment, several clients refused to pay, and the business collapsed. David used his share differently. He spent almost a year traveling Mexico, Spain, Thailand, music festivals, road trips. Whenever anyone questioned him, he said the same thing: "I'm only young once." I never judged either of them. That part matters. Mark took a risk and lost. David bought experiences he still talks about today. They were adults using their own money. But I made a different choice. After graduating, I worked for a regional accounting firm. I learned everything I could: bookkeeping, payroll, internal controls, tax preparation, inventory reconciliation. The work was often repetitive, but I liked the order of it. Numbers usually tell the truth eventually. People are more complicated. By 28, I had enough clients on the side to leave my job and open a small firm of my own, Carter Financial Services. At the beginning, the company was just me, a secondhand desk, and a laptop that overheated during video calls. James helped me assemble furniture in a rented office barely larger than a storage unit. He also sat beside me during the nights when I wondered whether I had made the worst decision of my life. James worked in commercial insurance. His income covered most of our household expenses during the first year, while almost everything my business earned went back into software, licensing, insurance, and contractors. We lived below what we could afford, not because we hated enjoying life, because both of us had grown up watching one unexpected bill turn into a family emergency. We wanted freedom more than we wanted appearances. The firm grew slowly. One client became three, three became seven. Eventually, I hired two full-time accountants and an administrative assistant. Our largest client was a hospitality company called South Coast Group. They operated restaurants and boutique hotels throughout Florida. My firm handled monthly reconciliations, vendor reviews, payroll reporting, and accounting support for several of their locations. Mark also worked for South Coast. He was a regional operations supervisor. He had joined the company before they hired my firm, and everyone involved knew that we were siblings. Our responsibilities were separate. Mark managed operations, my company reviewed financial records. For years, that arrangement caused no serious problems, at least none that I could see. Outside work, I had gradually become the person my family called when something went wrong. When James's car needed a new transmission, I lent him the money. When David fell behind on a medical bill, I paid it. When one of my nieces needed a laptop for school, I bought it. I told myself I was helping because I could. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I also liked being needed. Money had become the easiest way for me to feel useful to my family. I didn't have children of my own. James and I had discussed it, but neither of us felt ready to make that decision. My brothers had families, school events, birthday parties, and full houses. Sometimes I worried that as our lives became more different, we would stop being close. So I paid dinners. I covered emergencies. I organized gatherings. I told myself generosity was how I kept everyone connected. James noticed the pattern before I did. One evening, after I paid one of David's overdue insurance bills, he said, "You know you're allowed to love people without solving every problem they bring you." I know. Do you? They're my brothers. I'm not saying don't help them. I'm saying you should notice how rarely anyone asks whether helping costs you something. At the time, I thought he was being too cautious. Then I planned Hawaii. The idea began with a photograph. My niece Ava had a school assignment about places she wanted to visit, and she chose Hawaii. She drew a beach, a volcano, and a palm tree that looked more like a giant feather. At a family dinner, she showed everyone the picture. David laughed and said, "Maybe one day, kid." The disappointment on her face stayed with me. That night, I started calculating flights, rooms, meals, transportation. If I used reward points, booked early, and kept the trip to 5 nights, James and I could afford to take everyone, not our parents. My mother had health issues and didn't want to fly that far. But Mark, David, their wives, and all 5 children, 11 people, plus James and me, 13 in total. The trip would cost just over $36,000. It was an enormous amount of money, but it would not put us in debt. We used part of an investment account specifically designated for travel and charitable giving. James asked me one question before we booked it. "Are you doing this because you truly want to?" "Yes." "Or because you're afraid everyone will drift apart if you stop creating reasons for them to be together?" I didn't like the question. That's not fair. It isn't an accusation. I want the kids to experience something beautiful. Then let that be the reason. It was, mostly. When I announced the trip, the reaction was everything I had imagined. The children screamed. My sisters-in-law hugged me. David lifted me off the floor. Mark kept shaking his head and asking whether I was serious. For several days, the family group chat was filled with swimsuit pictures, restaurant ideas, and messages about how unbelievable the trip would be. I felt happy. I also felt relieved. Everyone was excited. Everyone was together. For a moment, money seemed to have done exactly what I wanted it to do. The first day in Hawaii was wonderful. The children ran toward the ocean before anyone had finished unpacking. We ate dinner outside while the sun turned the sky orange and purple. Ava looked at me and said, "This is better than my drawing." That sentence alone almost made the entire expense feel worthwhile. But by the second day, the questions started. At breakfast, Mark looked around the hotel restaurant. "How much are these rooms?" "I booked a package." "That isn't what I asked." "Why does it matter?" "I'm curious." Lisa, his wife, leaned closer. "I looked online. Rooms here are almost $900 a night." David whistled. "For how many rooms?" "Can we not calculate the vacation while we're still on it?" James asked. Everyone laughed, but Mark didn't. Later that afternoon, the hotel accidentally delivered a printed activity summary to my room. It listed the reservation total before credits and points. Mark saw it on the table while looking for sunscreen. $36,000? He said it loudly enough for everyone in the suite to hear. I took the paper from him. "That isn't the final amount." "How far from the final amount could it possibly be?" "I used points and travel credits." "But you still paid most of it." "Yes." "With what?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "With what money?" "My money." "I know it's your money. I'm asking where it came from." The room became uncomfortable. James stepped beside me. "Emily and I planned the trip. We could afford it." Mark laughed. "Apparently." That evening, David suggested a helicopter tour. For all 13 of us, it would have cost several $1,000s. I said no. "We already have plans tomorrow." The kids would never forget it. They are already having an unforgettable vacation. But after spending all this, what's another few thousand? I stared at him. "To you, maybe not much. It's still several $1,000s. You clearly have it." James answered before I could. "Having money does not mean every possible expense becomes reasonable." David raised both hands. I was joking, but he wasn't. The following morning, Caroline, David's wife, asked me whether James and I had started college funds for the nieces and nephews. "No." "Really? Why?" "Why would we?" She looked surprised by the question. "You don't have children." That doesn't make your children financially ours. You didn't say that. No, but you asked whether we were funding their education. I was only curious. David joined the conversation. You could probably grow the money faster than we could. That still doesn't explain why we would be responsible for it. He smiled. Aunt Emily's scholarship fund. The children laughed because he thought he was being funny. I tried to laugh too, but something had changed. Before Hawaii, my family knew I was comfortable. After Hawaii, they believed they had seen proof that I was rich. And once they decided that, every financial decision I had ever made became evidence in a case they were building inside their own heads. On the final night, James and I sat alone on the hotel balcony. The others had gone downstairs. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what?" "The questions, the comments. You didn't make them say those things. I should have expected it." "Why?" "Because I've been paying for things for years." James was quiet. "I think I taught them that if they needed something, I would eventually take care of it. Helping them did not make this your fault." "No, but I never set a limit." He looked out at the ocean. "Then this may be the moment you start." I wanted to believe the awkwardness would disappear when we returned home. Instead, the trip followed me directly into my office. 11 days after Hawaii, I received an email from South Coast Group's chief financial officer. Effective immediately, Carter Financial Services was being suspended from accessing the company's accounting systems. The email said an internal complaint had raised concerns about inflated invoices, hours billed for work that may not have been performed, and the possible diversion of vendor rebates into accounts connected to my firm. I read the message twice, then a third time. South Coast represented almost 30% of my company's annual revenue. Losing the contract would hurt. Being accused of financial misconduct could destroy us. Accounting firms survive on trust. Once clients begin wondering whether you manipulate numbers, innocence is not always enough to repair the damage. I called the chief financial officer. His name was Anthony Reyes. "Anthony, what exactly is happening?" "We received a detailed ethics complaint." "From whom?" "I can't disclose that yet." "Does the complaint contain evidence?" "It contains invoice numbers, payment dates, and screenshots from our internal system." My hands went cold. Only someone with company access could have collected those screenshots. "What are you asking us to do?" "We're bringing in an outside forensic accountant. Until the review is completed, your access will remain suspended." "How long?" "I don't know." "My employees work on your account every day." "I understand." "No, Anthony, I don't think you do. This allegation affects my company's reputation, my insurance, my staff, and every other client who trusts us." "I'm not saying we believe it." "You believe it enough to suspend us. We have to investigate." He was right. I hated that he was right. After the call, I gathered my staff. I told them the truth. One of my accountants, Nicole, looked frightened. "Are they accusing all of us?" "No, the complaint focuses on me and the firm's billing." "Could we lose the client?" "Yes." I could have reassured them with something vague. Instead, I said, "Our records are clean. We're going to prove that. But I will not pretend this isn't serious." That afternoon, James came to the office. He found me surrounded by contracts, invoices, time records, and bank statements. "Do you know who did it?" he asked. "Yes." "You're certain?" "I can't prove it yet." "But you know." "Mark." James sat across from me. "Why?" "Because he asked where the money came from, because he works inside South Coast, because the complaint uses internal invoice screenshots." "That's not suspicion, that's a trail. I need the auditors to establish it." James nodded. "Then facts, nothing else." For the next 3 weeks, my life became an investigation. The forensic team examined every invoice my firm had sent South Coast in the previous 2 years. They compared timesheets with project records. They traced vendor rebates. They reviewed my business accounts, investment accounts, tax returns, and the account used to pay for Hawaii. I hated giving strangers access to so much of my life, but I handed over everything. The troop had been paid from a joint investment account belonging to James and me, not from client funds, not from my operating account, not from a mysterious transfer. Every dollar was documented. Still, the suspension created real damage. South Coast stopped paying 2 outstanding invoices until the review ended. I had to use part of our business reserve to cover payroll. A potential client delayed signing a contract after hearing that one of our major accounts was under review. The accusation had not been proven, but rumors don't wait for proof. While all of that was happening, David called me. At first, he sounded concerned. Mom told me something is happening with South Coast. It's being handled. Is the business okay? I don't know yet. There was a pause. Then he said, I actually wanted to talk to you about Ava, his oldest daughter, the one whose drawing had inspired the trip. What about her? She got information from Belmont University. Belmont was a private university she'd been talking about months. That's exciting. It's also expensive, I'm sure. We can cover some of it. She might qualify for aid, but there will still be a gap. I waited. He cleared his throat. I was thinking you and James could help. How much help? Maybe the first year. How much is the first year? After aid, probably $28,000. I thought I had misheard him. You're asking us for $28,000? It wouldn't have to be all at once. David, my company is under investigation, which is probably going to be fine. You don't know that. Come on, Emily, we both know you didn't steal anything. It was the first time either brother had said that directly. Then why did Mark report me? Another silence. I don't know exactly what Mark did. Yes, you do. He thought something didn't add up. And you think the answer is that I should pay for your daughter's university? That isn't what I'm saying. It is literally what you called to ask. His tone changed. You spent $36,000 for a 5-day vacation. I chose to give everyone that trip. Exactly, so you can afford to do something that actually matters. The sentence hit harder than I expected. Something that actually matters? You know what I mean. No, explain it. Ava's education will affect the rest of her life. Hawaii was just a vacation. A vacation you accepted. I appreciated it. You spent the entire week calculating what else my money could buy. That's unfair. No, what's unfair is turning a gift into evidence that I owe you more. You don't have children. There it was. The argument I had always suspected existed underneath the others. You think because James and I don't have children, our money belongs to your children? I didn't say it belongs to them. You just suggested that my life has fewer legitimate expenses than yours. I'm saying family helps family. I have helped. So now there's a limit? Yes. He became quiet. Then he said, You've changed. No, David, you saw how much the trip cost, and your expectations changed. I ended the call. For the first time, I understood that the audit and the tuition request were not two separate problems. They came from the same belief. My brothers did not see the Hawaii trip as a generous decision. They saw it as financial disclosure, a statement of what I could afford, and therefore, in their minds, a statement of what they were entitled to request. The forensic review ended the following week. Anthony asked me to attend a meeting at South Coast's main office. James came with me, along with my attorney. The outside auditor placed a thick report on the table. We found no evidence of inflated billing, diverted funds, kickbacks, or improper payments, she said. Every invoice had been supported, every rebate had been credited correctly, every hour billed corresponded with documented work. My company was completely cleared. Then Anthony turned to the final section of the report. The screenshots attached to the original complaint had been downloaded through Mark's employee account. Some of the records were outside the normal scope of his position. He had accessed them during the week after we returned from Hawaii. The complaint had not been anonymous after all. Not really. Digital records rarely are. Anthony told me that Mark had admitted submitting it after being confronted with the access logs. He claimed he had acted out of genuine concern. South Coast was handling his conduct internally. They could not discuss the exact disciplinary decision with me, but our contract would be restored immediately. They also provided a written statement confirming that the allegations were unfounded. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. My brother had risked my company, my employees' jobs, and my professional name because he couldn't imagine that I had built something he did not fully understand. I met Mark at a coffee shop 3 days later. He arrived late. He did not apologize. He sat down and said, "I didn't know they were going to turn it into such a huge investigation. You accused an accounting firm of stealing from a client. What did you think would happen?" I asked them to look into it. You used confidential records. I had access. You did not have authorization to use them against a vendor because of a personal suspicion. Mark stared at his coffee. I saw what that trip cost. So, it didn't make sense. What didn't? You handle accounting for the same company where I work. I know roughly what South Coast pays your firm. You know one client. It still didn't add up. My firm has 11 active clients. He looked up. 11? Yes. I thought South Coast was most of your business. It is our largest client. It is not our only client. You never told me that. You never asked about my company. You asked how much the hotel cost. He looked embarrassed. I continued. James also earns money. We have investments. We have been saving for years. The trip came from a personal investment account. How was I supposed to know all that? You weren't. He frowned. You made it look like the money came from nowhere. No, Mark, you decided that because you could not explain my finances, dishonesty was more believable than success. That isn't fair. You submitted a theft complaint because we had the same start, Emily. The sentence surprised me. What does that mean? Mom and Dad gave us the same amount. We grew up in the same house. I work hard too, but you can spend $36,000 on a vacation while I'm worried about my mortgage. I know your business failed. You don't know what that did to me. You're right, I don't. I lost everything. I spent years paying off debt, and you just kept moving forward. There was real pain in his voice. For the first time, I could see what had been underneath the accusation. Not concern, shame. My success had become evidence in the case he was building against himself. But pain does not make every reaction acceptable. You were allowed to feel angry, I said. You were allowed to feel embarrassed, jealous, or disappointed. You were not allowed to put my company under investigation because those feelings were easier than asking me a question. He rubbed his face. I thought if the complaint was wrong, they would just dismiss it. They froze our contract. I used business reserves to pay my employees. A potential client walked away. I paid an attorney and lost weeks of work. You still have the company. That is not a defense. He looked at me. What do you want me to do? I wanted you not to do it. I can't change that now. No, you can't. He finally said, I'm sorry, but the apology came after every excuse had failed. I believed he regretted the consequences. I wasn't yet sure he understood the betrayal. That weekend, my parents asked all three of us to come to their house. David was already there when James and I arrived. Mark sat on the opposite side of the living room. My mother began by saying that everyone had made mistakes. I stopped her. No, we are not starting there. Emily, I did not falsely accuse anyone of theft. She looked uncomfortable. I'm only saying that we need to find a way forward. My father turned to Mark. What you did was wrong. I apologized. David spoke next, and Emily told me she won't help Ava with college. James looked at him in disbelief. You brought that into this conversation? It's part of the same issue. No, I said, it proves the same issue. What issue? That both of you looked at the Hawaii trip and decided my finances had become a family resource. David shook his head. No one said that. You asked for $28,000 for your niece's education after accepting a $36,000 vacation. Why do you keep saying accepted as though we forced you to pay? That question stopped me because he was right about one thing. No one had forced me to pay for Hawaii. I offered. I made every reservation. I ignored James when he warned me to examine why I was doing it. I chose the trip. That was my decision. Exactly. And choosing one generous thing did not create an unlimited obligation. My mother spoke softly. Maybe the trip gave everyone the wrong impression. No, James said. The trip gave everyone a generous experience. What they did with that information afterward was their decision. My father looked at me. Do you regret taking them? I thought about Ava on the beach, the children laughing in the water, the sunset dinner. Then I thought about the questions, the audit, and David's phone call. I regret believing that paying for everything would make us feel closer. No one answered. That was the truth I had avoided. The trip had not only been for them, part of it had been for me. I wanted to be the sister who created the perfect memory, the aunt everyone loved, the person who could solve distance, disappointment, and family tension with one extraordinary gift. I had used generosity to avoid asking whether we were genuinely close without it. I helped too often without setting boundaries. I made it easy for everyone to assume I would always fix things. That was my mistake. David leaned back. So you admit you created the expectation. I created a pattern of helping. I did not create your entitlement. The room went silent. Then I told them what would change. I would no longer lend money to either brother. I would not pay tuition, mortgages, insurance, or business debts. There would be no more fully funded family vacations. I would continue buying normal gifts for the children and attending family events when the relationships were respectful, but my finances were no longer available for discussion. Mark said, "So this is punishment." No, punishment would be trying to damage your career because I was angry. He looked away. This is a boundary. My mother cried. A year earlier, that would have made me reverse everything. This time, I let her be sad. Her emotions mattered. They just did not automatically become my responsibility. The following months were uncomfortable. Mark received a formal suspension from South Coast and was moved out of any role involving my firm's records. He remained with the company, but our contact became minimal. David stopped calling unless the conversation involved our parents or the children. Ava eventually chose a public university that offered her a strong financial aid package. She called me before accepting. "I want you to know I never asked Dad to call you." "I know. Are you mad at me?" "Not even a little." I sent her a graduation gift, a laptop, and a handwritten note. I did not pay her tuition. There is a difference between giving because you want to and paying because someone has decided your success belongs to them. My relationship with Mark remains complicated. Several months after the investigation, he sent me a longer apology. He admitted that seeing the cost of Hawaii had triggered something he had never confronted about the failure of his business. He'd spent years telling himself that I was luckier, more connected, or secretly receiving opportunities he had never been offered. The trip made that story harder to maintain. So instead of asking how I had built my company, he searched for proof that I had cheated. I appreciated the honesty. I have not forgotten what he did. Forgiveness does not require pretending someone is safe before they have demonstrated change. David still believes family members with more resources should help those with less. I don't entirely disagree. James and I donate money. We help our parents. We support causes we care about. Sometimes we assist relatives privately. But help must remain voluntary. The moment generosity becomes a bill someone else believes they can send you, it is no longer generosity. My firm survived. South Coast restored the contract. The potential client who had delayed signing never returned, but two others eventually took its place. The investigation cost money, time, and trust. Being cleared did not magically erase that, but it changed how I ran the business. No family members have access to client information connected to my firm. Every potential conflict is documented, and my personal finances stay personal. James and I still travel, sometimes extravagantly. The difference is that I no longer use money to prove that a relationship is close. I let the relationship prove itself. I don't believe my brothers are monsters. Mark was ashamed and turned that shame into suspicion. David was frightened about his daughter's future and turned my generosity into an expectation. I can understand both of those things. Understanding them does not mean financing them. And loving my family does not require giving them access to everything I worked to build. I thought Hawaii would be the memory that brought us closer. Instead, it taught me something more valuable. People who are grateful for a gift enjoy the gift. People who feel entitled begin calculating what else you could give them. So let me ask you honestly, if your sibling falsely accused your company of theft because they could not understand your success, would you ever trust them again? And after paying for an entire family vacation, would you have helped cover a niece's private university tuition? Or was Emily right to close the family bank permanently? Drop your verdict in the comments. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who has learned that generosity without boundaries can become an invitation to entitlement. Because here, one story always leads to another.